Good morning, welcome. I'm Christian Guy, I'm the Director of the Centre for Social Justice. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, and for those who've seen the wave of media that the Secretary of State's been doing. I think we're in for a very interesting speech indeed. I'll speak for just a few minutes by way of introduction. I'll hand over to the Secretary of State, who will make his speech, and then we'll finish with some questions from the audience. And I forgot this last time I didn't know about this. If you want to use Twitter, if you're brave enough to use Twitter, it's just the hashtag sort of Rehabilitation Revolution. It's quite long, so you have to keep the rest of your tweet fairly short. But and if you want to tag the CSJ, it's at CSJ Think Tank on Twitter. It's a real privilege for us at the CSJ to host the Justice Secretary for his first major speech since taking office. Where our work has connected in the past, whether it's as Shadow Home Secretary at the Department for Work and Pensions or at the Ministry of Justice, Chris Grayling has always struck me as a man who's on a reforming mission wherever reform is required. And as was reported at the time of his appointment, we're really hopeful he'll bring the same energy, commitment and purpose that has characterised his time on welfare and with the work programme into the world of courts, prisons and community justice. Although we haven't heard the speech yet, I think the early signs are really positive that it's going to do just that. It's particularly pleasing for us at the CSJ to host this speech as well, because about a month ago, a few hundred yards from here, we hosted the Prime Minister as he made his first major law and order speech. In that speech, David Cameron began to set out plans for speeding up the government's rehabilitation revolution. He talked about a tough but intelligent approach to criminal justice, and he set out clear plans for punishment, which is a key part, of course, of such a system as that, but also the need to turn off the reoffending tap that has for so many years been flowing at the cost of many billions of pounds. And when taking questions after that speech, I don't know how helpful this was to the Secretary of State, he said the Secretary of State will be back to flesh out more of the detail and to answer the finer points. And I think that's what today marks the start of and that process. The other reason it's a real privilege for us to host the Justice Secretary today is that the CSJ has been calling for major and radical criminal justice reform for many years now. We were established to find and promote solutions to the root causes of poverty, and we've published more than 600, I think, ideas about how we can do that and counting. Yet as we've spent time in the poorest parts of the UK and the low-income communities all over the country, we've also seen and encountered the criminal justice system at almost every turn. Crime damages every area, nothing excuses it, and people who commit crime have to be punished. Yet its anarchy is most prevalent in our deprived neighbourhoods. Our courtrooms and prisons are full of shocking, often preventable social failure. That's why, in our view, social justice and criminal justice should go hand in hand. Our Welcome Crime has covered policing reform, which was led by Mayor of Middlesbrough, Ray Mallon. We called for zero tolerance policing, elected commissioners, and it was the time to end sort of wasted bureaucracy that sort of suffocated our police officers. We talked about courts and sentencing reform, about the importance of a probation service that gets back to first principles, the importance of local justice and honesty in sentencing. And of course, Jonathan Aitken, who says himself he had a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view of the prison system, led our work on prison reform. And that report called for a number of the issues we're here to discuss today, including through-the-gate mentoring for those who are living in jail. We've also published work on young offenders and street gangs recently. I hope this research and the strategies that have emerged have proved helpful to politicians of all political persuasions, and I'm really pleased to see the coalition is taking forward a very similar agenda. For us at the CSJ, we believe there is more to be done as a think tank on criminal justice, and so alongside a new report we're beginning next week, actually, the second Breakthrough Britain review, we're going to be starting some new work on criminal justice that we hope will inform the debate and shape the battle of ideas for this area between now and the next general election. Crime is never far from our front pages, and the job of Justice Secretary is often a thankless task. For many years, I think those who have held office on this area have been content to just simply avoid crisis, never stepping far from the relative comfort of the status quo. But I think we all hope, that something more radical is about to emerge. Secretary of State, thank you very much for being with us this morning. I know you've had a busy round of media already today, and I think there is more to come. You've an expert and an attentive audience in front of you. We're excited by what you have to say. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice, Chris Grayling.
Well, thank you, Christian. A great pleasure to be here. There's sometimes a view that politics is shaped by ivory towers, by people who never spend time in the real world. Actually, the truth is very different. Our politics and our policies are so often shaped by the conversations we have with the people we meet around the country who, for different reasons, have found themselves at the sharp end of life. And nowhere do we find that experience more readily available than among the different organisations that are part of the Centre for Social Justice. So it's a particular pleasure for me to come and talk to such an informed and experienced audience this morning. And like many of you here, I'm also looking forward to seeing the evolution of the work that's going to be done by the Centre, Breakthrough Britain 2, building on the very useful work that it did while we were in opposition, really helping shape an agenda for us in the welfare arena, in the justice arena, and I know that this new report will be as influential on government and indeed political views across the spectrum as any of your past publications has been. Now you may remember a few weeks ago we had the latest crime figures. They continue to confound the expectations of some experts who believe that crime rises at a time of austerity. And a lot of people asking the question, why do you think crime is coming down? It's easy to come up with the simple explanations. It's harder to steal a car today than it used to be. The colour telly isn't the same kind of burglar magnet it used to be 20 or 30 years ago. Actually, I think there's another reason. Everywhere you go in Britain today, you find private and voluntary organisations engaged with government on motivating and mentoring young people from the most deprived backgrounds, helping steer them away from a life that can lead to antisocial behaviour and possibly crime. That work is at the heart of what the CSJ does, and at the heart of what so many of the organisations that are part of the CSJ does. And I really do believe that it is making a difference to those crime figures. Now, in shaping my ideas over the last few years, I've had many conversations with those people on the sharp end. I remember sitting in a classroom with a very troubled young man in Liverpool and thinking, actually at heart, he's a good kid. If only he had a stable home, then things could be very different for him. And that's why we need a multifaceted strategy to criminal justice and all the related social challenges that we face. Of course, we need to be tough on crime. We need to make the system more accountable. That's why we've got now elected police and crime commissioners to ensure the police deal with issues that really matter to local communities. And of course, we have to punish people properly when they commit crimes. But we also cannot ignore the sheer complexity of the problem. Broken homes, antisocial behaviour, drug and alcohol misuse, generational worklessness, violent and abusive relationships, childhood spent in care, mental illness, educational failure, all elements that are common in the background of so many offenders. And that, of course, is why our education and welfare reforms are so important in meeting this challenge. But they are only a part of what needs to be done. And I think two of those sharp-end conversations that I've had in the last few weeks have really brought home to me how our current system is letting people down, both victims and offenders alike. The first was with the family of a young man, tragically stabbed to death in a street fight that was not of his making by an offender out on licence. How could it be, they asked, that a man out of prison could be free to roam the streets on a Saturday night with friends carrying knives? How could this brutal crime have been allowed to happen? And listening to them, I was in no doubt that the system had let them down in the worst possible way. A couple of weeks ago, I was also sitting in a rehab centre in Stoke-on-Trent, run by a local charity. The comments of one of the men there particularly struck home. He was in his 30s, he'd been in and out of the criminal justice system, and he said to me simply, when I came out of prison, I wanted to get my life back together, but I just didn't know. And that's the tragedy. Nearly half of prisoners themselves say they will need help to find a job when they leave prison. Over a third say they'll need help to find somewhere to live when they come out of prison. And yet all we actually do in this country is take those people, we release them back on the streets with £46 in their pockets, often for short sentence offenders with no support whatsoever, and then we're surprised they reoffend again quickly and come back to prison. And whether you are the hardest of hardliners on crime, or the most liberal observer, every single one of us has a vested interest in breaking that cycle, in ensuring that we have an enlightened approach to preventing reoffending. We cannot just keep recycling people around and around the system. Now, it's the views I've built up through all of those conversations over many years since I became an MP that have shaped the 5 priorities that I have given the Ministry of Justice for the remainder of this Parliament. We need to tackle that rehabilitation problem. We need a revolution in the way we handle offenders and work to prevent them from reoffending. Then we also need big changes to the way we deal with children who are offenders, with a much greater focus on education in a secure environment. We have to focus on making the prison system cheaper and not smaller. I don't want somebody who should be in prison out on the streets because there is no space available. And then we need to reshape our legal aid system so it commands public confidence. And I want a real drive for a criminal justice and court system that works effectively and puts victims first. 5 priorities for the department. 5 priorities to me that are exactly what transforming justice looks like. Now, top of the list is that revolution in rehabilitation, a process of rapid change to the way we deal with offenders that will be at the heart of the work that we do between now and the next election. That revolution will be built around the principle of payment by results. Because what payment by results does is opens up the provision of post-prison services to a whole host of new participants in a way that forces anyone involved to be excellent at what they do. I want the state to be paying for results, not just for the delivery of a service. That is the only way you get the best outcome for both the taxpayer, but crucially, because it's about much more than money, crucially for the people we're trying to help, the people whose lives we're trying to turn around. It means that we only pay for what works. And in this particular case, what works means that those leaving prison don't simply fall back into crime and reoffend. Now, in the recent speech that Christian mentioned that the Prime Minister gave here, he signalled our ambition to see payment by results spread right across the rehabilitation of offenders by 2015. And I will shortly publish a paper detailing our plans to inform all of those who would like to be a part of that revolution. I'll invite all of them to come forward with their ideas, and in particular, I want to make sure that in the process we go through, we capture the skills of specialised organisations, many in the voluntary sector, who have much to offer in this field. So what does all that mean in real life? What is the practical, on-the-ground reality for that? Very simple. I want, when someone leaves prison, I don't want them walking down the street on their own with that 46 quid in their pocket. I want them to already have a mentor in place to help them get their lives back together. I want them to be met at the prison gate, to have a place to live sorted out, and above all, someone who knows where they are, what they're doing, and can be a wise friend to prevent them from reoffending. Someone who's made sure that they've got training or rehab lined up, because we're also determined to deal with the root causes of offending, to get drug and alcohol users into recovery, and to address mental health needs. Now often, it will be the former offender gone straight who is best placed to steer the young prisoner back onto the straight and narrow. The former gang member, best placed to prevent younger members from rushing back to the same streets, the same gangs they were hanging around with before. And there are some really good examples out there of organisations making good use of the old lags and stopping the new ones. We need more of that for the future. Now, the probation service does important work with difficult individuals, and I want to make sure we use that expertise as we transform our approach to rehabilitation. The public sector will, of course, continue to have a significant role in the reformed system, particularly in working with serious offenders and in guarding our society against harm. But it is time to make sure that we use all of the expertise that is out there to help drive the improvements that we need. That is the only way to give us a fighting chance to stop those offenders from coming back to prison all over again. Now, alongside that revolution in the rehabilitation of adult offenders is a second big challenge. We currently spend £245 million a year on the detention of around 1,800 young people. That's about £100,000 a place, but in some cases, up to £200,000 per place. At that extreme, 5 times the cost of sending children to a top private school. Because 70% of them reoffend and come back all over again. You just have to understand what poor value for money that really is. Now, in accountancy terms, it's about bad investments, poor value for money. Actually, I think it's a travesty. How on earth can we be in a position where we're investing so much for so little gain? And these are often deeply troubled children who have grown up in the most difficult and challenging circumstances. All too often they can't read or write. Most have been out of school for years. Of course we need to detain them, but we also need to educate them. And it makes no sense to have them under our control and not to make a real effort to send them on with better skills, a better chance of getting a job, and a better chance of having a fulfilled life. So I've begun a review of our youth custody estate with a view to building a much stronger educational heart to it. I want education to be central to what we do with those young people. So I'm going to want to listen to organisations that know how to teach problem teenagers, not just to those who know how to detain them, to people in the education world, not simply people in the security world. And I will bring forward a strategy for change in the near future. But all this does not mean a softer approach on prisons. I do believe that prison works, I just don't think it works well enough. I have no doubt that one of the reasons for the lower crime levies we've seen in recent years, another of the reasons, is the fact that more people are in prison. You know, every police force will tell you that their burglary rates drop when the local serial burglar is behind bars. It's just common sense. And that's why I do not want the courts to hold back from sending the right people to prison. But of course, our prisons are not immune from the cost pressures that the entire public sector faces. We have to save money as much as any other part of government, and we have to do so in the short term and not the long term. So we have a simple choice. We can either have fewer people in our prisons, or we can bring down the cost of each prison place. It will be no surprise which option I chose. I want to strain every sinew to make our prison system more cost effective and to bring those costs down. That is what we will be doing. It's what this month's announcement on prisons and who can most efficiently run them was all about. We didn't take back the world's prison from G4S because of what happened at the Olympics. We did so because, having looked at their bid, it made more sense to merge that prison with neighbouring prisons, with shared facilities, shared leadership, and reduced costs. But let nobody think that saving money means you have to have less work, less opportunity for employment and training for offenders in our prisons. We will continue to increase the hours prisoners spend in work and in training. And if anyone doesn't believe that's possible, they just need to visit some of our newer prisons to see how better facilities can be delivered at much lower cost. I've got one other message on prisons. Both Jeremy Wright, the Prisons Minister, and I are very aware of the concerns about the regime inside our prisons. Prison is not meant to be a comfortable place full of perks and undeserved privileges. And those offenders who smuggle mobile phones into prisons and take pictures of themselves and their fellow inmates purporting to be having an easy time should take heed. they will face serious disciplinary consequences. All of this is why Jeremy is, as a matter of urgency, reviewing the prison regime. We will make changes where we need to. The fourth priority for change is in legal aid. Now, we've already had to make changes for financial reasons and to target funding where it is needed the most. And I cannot promise that the legal aid system will be immune from further money pressures. But right now, my focus is on confidence in the system. Last week, we published figures about the amount of money that Abu Hamza was able to receive in legal aid for his extradition. Most right-minded people will have been shocked, but sadly they probably won't have been surprised. Now, the truth is that the interest of justice will mean that society sometimes has to provide legal support to people we find repellent. That's justice, and it's an essential part of a democratic nation. But whether in high-profile cases or elsewhere, legal aid must never become a vehicle for people to keep justice at bay, or to make the taxpayer pick up the tab where people can afford to pay their legal costs themselves. It must be focused on those who most need it, and the interests of the taxpayer, not of the lawyers. So I've asked for urgent work to be done to look at how we can ensure that we have a legal aid system that completely commands the public's confidence, and where the decisions that we take really are in the interest of justice and not in conflict with it. And that's also why we yesterday announced that we're looking at changes to the system of judicial review to crack down on hopeless cases which lead to unnecessary cost and delay. My fifth area of change, and very important it is too, is about putting victims at the heart of the criminal justice system. All too often, I hear of the huge frustrations of those who find themselves falling foul of criminal activity, about a court system that takes too long, and where cases are managed in an all too often chaotic way, particularly from the perspective of the victim, of a system that often seems to be more interested in the offender than in the victim, of a lack of information about what is going on, things that really have to change. My message to the family of that young man so tragically stabbed to death, when minding his own business on a Saturday night, is that we will take further steps to address the very real issue of knife crime. But it's not just about sentencing. Actually, believe it or not, sentences today are tougher than they were. Burglars, for example, spend longer in jail today than they did 10 years ago. It's also about making sure that victims feel the system works for them too. That means a process in our courts that is quicker and less erratic, with fewer cases collapsing at the last minute or being delayed and delayed. Less than half of criminal trials go ahead as planned, meaning that victim and witness expectations are too often raised and then dashed, to say nothing of the worry and stress that this causes. A quarter of those who attended court to give evidence reported that they themselves or their family were intimidated during the process. That cannot be right. It also means tougher action to deal with antisocial yobs, who make their neighbours' lives a misery, and also with offenders bullying their victims on social media sites, something I feel particularly strongly has to be dealt with in the toughest possible way. And it also means location monitoring, to make sure that offenders banned from entering particular areas like courts aren't just free to wander those town centres on a Saturday night to commit crimes. Now, all of this has to be done against the background of budget pressures that we know are not going away anytime soon. So we have to be much smarter in the way we run public services. Now, the popular refrain from the opposition is that cuts means less. I don't accept that for the moment. In recent years, almost every major private sector organisation has found new and more cost-effective ways of doing things, and has often found at the same time that it can deliver a better service as a result. That is what we are now doing in the public sector. And it's what we're doing in the Ministry of Justice as well. The status quo is not an option. I think we can deliver better rehabilitation of offenders, a smarter system of detaining and educating teenage offenders, a cheaper and better prison system, and a legal aid and criminal justice system that command more public confidence, and yet at the same time we can still bring costs down. Now I think you all have an important part to play in that. The Centre for Social Justice was set up to help lift parts of our society out of the rut into which they were sunk. Sorting out our justice system is a really important part of doing that. And over the coming years, my team and I will do everything we can to deliver the change that is so desperately needed. We'll do it together, we'll listen to the work you're doing, we'll look for good ideas. Ultimately, the status quo cannot be the option for us. Things must change, we must do it better. And above all, we must totally transform our justice system so we change people's lives, deliver justice, but make sure those people don't simply keep coming on back and back and back, again and again. It's as much a challenge to deliver better lives for them as it is to deliver justice for victims, justice for people who are caught up in our criminal justice system, and to make sure we have a world that everyone can have more confidence in. Thank you. Now I'm very happy to take some questions. If for the purpose of those who don't know everyone, you could say who you are. Gentleman over there.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Richard Garside from the Centre for Justice Studies. I was very interested, I'm sure, numbered by your comments about the cheaper and smaller businesses. When we looked at the Universe prison system years ago, we looked at expenditure over a 10-year period from 1999 to 2000. We found that real terms expenditure in the prison system had declined in real terms around 17%. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on where you think the additional savings are coming from.
Well, I think it's the difference between newer facilities and older facilities, and we've inherited as a new ministerial team from the team that have been there for the last 2.5 years, projects and developments to upgrade and modernise. Not all the capital budgets have disappeared. I mean, I would simply refer you to Edgewood Prison in the Midlands, which is newly opened in the last 6 months. It's filling up as we speak, and the facilities there for training are excellent. The facilities for developing employment-related skills are excellent, and the cost of keeping a prisoner there is a fraction of the price of keeping them in older prisons. And so my view is we've got to move as quickly as we sensibly can within the financial constraints that we've got to modernising and developing and adapting the state, the prison estate, to reflect what can be done. So we're in a situation now where some prisons are costing twice as much or 3 times as much as others, and we've got to make sure that we actually have best practice and the most modern facilities we possibly can to bring those costs down.
Rob Owen, St Giles Trust. I think a lot of us will celebrate your Agincourt moment. And I suppose in a way, with that analogy, it's about creating an army of peer advisors or mentors. And actually, we found in our experience the best place to do that is in prison. And so that's one of the questions: is that going to, how do you think about how you can encourage that model to work, actually utilising offenders in prison to become the next wave of peer advisors on the outside? And I suppose ultimately it's about people and not programs that's going to really drive this rehabilitation revolution, and how the voluntary sector, for example, can play a real role in providing the right people.
Well, I think I would pay tribute to the work that St Giles Trust and the other charities have done and the work that's been done in Peterborough. One of the small number of trials of paper results taking place in the prison system. When I went there, one of the things that impressed me was the work that was being done within the prison, using older, longer-term prisoners to start to mentor people in shorter-term sentences. And in doing so, you both provide positives for the younger generation, but actually also training a new generation of mentors into roles that can possibly fulfill after they leave prison. And these are people who showed every signs of having now reached the point where they're looking to move on and have decent, law-abiding lives. I think the work that the voluntary sector can do in this is enormous. I think in the end, what it will be is partnerships with different ranges of organisations. What we'll see is private companies, we'll see private companies in partnership with voluntary companies, we'll see voluntary sector organisations backed by social finance. And I think one of the things I would be saying now to everyone in the voluntary sector is to start to think about it. Because we will be doing this over the next few months. I want to see you involved. If I have one lesson from the work programme where some of the voluntary sector said it didn't work for us, I don't actually accept that because there's other in the voluntary sector who are talking a good story. But the thing that I found most acutely is that the voluntary sector had not thought through what it needed to do to operate in the world of payment by results as much as I would wish to have it. And I hope that some of that experience has been built already, but actually over the next few months, as we prepare to go through this process, what I hope is that the voluntary sector will talk to the social finance world, will look at how it pools resource, look at how it puts together consortia to bid. I think there's really good expertise. Now look for good private sector partnerships as well, but make sure you're ready, because I want you to be at the table. But ultimately, my responsibility is to do the best job I possibly can to turn those offenders' lives around. So obviously we'll get the best propositions on the table when the time comes, but please be ready, because the opportunity is there for you and what we want you to take.
Anthony Downs from Pat, Secretary of State, I'm very heartened by the idea of these wise friends engaged we do. We need an alternative to rugby every day.
Yes, absolutely.
We've also got a lot of experience of working with our family, and we know that if we can maintain family relationships, strengthen family relationships, parent instincts, whilst being very positive, they are significantly less likely to prevent people to give them hope in those relationships, and also the greater probability of our hope to less prone to finding it. Absolutely, if you care to comment on the importance of family work.
But I mean, clearly, the stronger the family ties, the better. I mean, one of the most striking of the bits of evidence that come through about what happens to teenage offenders, and it tends to be boys rather than girls, is that when the boys get a girlfriend, they're much more likely to go straight. So yeah, it's one of those little bits of evidence that shows that actually stronger relationships in your life mean you're less likely to go off the straight and narrow. So I'm very sympathetic to that. One of the things that we will do in building this new group is make sure that the process of support starts in prison and flows through the prison gate. It's not just something that starts in the prison gate. So we will integrate the resettlement that we do in prison afterwards. It's slightly more complicated by the fact that not every prisoner who's released is released into their own local neighbourhood. We're thinking around how best to deal with that. But I absolutely agree with that. It's important. It's part of the process that takes people past the gate and beyond.
We're welcoming activities today and look forward to rocking in the rehabilitation and competition is important in relation to competition. But within the market, within this sector, it's fair to say we've been here before, and I think certainly over the past 2 years there's been a lot of time, money and resource that's gone into competing money which could have actually been spent on both the offender or the victim with no actual fruition of any of that competition. So my question is twofold. Firstly, what guarantees are going to be in place, or what's the time around that this will actually happen, and won't be in that same cycle again, so breaking the cycle and then also you talked about a reduction in the offenders, so are we still looking at a binary measure, or are we going to move to more of a frequency measure?
But on that latter point, I'm more minded towards a binary measure that we think about at the moment. In terms of the process, I guess one of the things that I bring to the job is a sense of determination just to do it. And those who remember us setting up the work programme, it took 1 year and 19 days from the moment I walked into the DWP to the moment that the first people walked into a work programme centre. We are working through the timeline for this at the moment, but believe me, the officials in the department are well aware that we need to keep the timeline as tight as possible. I mean, I kind of take the view that it's 2.5 years to the next election, and I want us to have done this and to be coming to some serious fruition of things actually happening before then. I don't think it does any of us any favours. Certainly doesn't do the people talking about it any favours if we don't get our skates on doing this.
Good morning, Justice Secretary. Jonathan Ledger, General Secretary of NAPO, and again welcoming much of what you said this morning and agreeing with much of that. But I heard you at the early stage welcome the drop in criminal behaviour, and you highlighted areas that have contributed to that. And I wonder, given your argument about less can be more, that given the probation service, for example, has suffered significant cuts in its staffing, and the number of probation staff now working directly with offenders has been reduced, it has played its own part in contributing to the reduction in criminal behaviour, and it would be good to hear you recognising that. And alongside that, from a practice perspective, I'd like to ask you about the dynamics of risk. I heard you on 5 Live this morning talking about, and you've reinforced it today, a focus now for the probation service on working increasingly with high-risk offenders. But as I know, I've had this discussion with your minister, I know it's an understanding that the dynamics of risk are fluid and changeable, and they require, often we know that the serious further offences that are taking place are often with people who be classified as lower risk. What thinking are you doing around this key area to ensure actually the key role of the probation service in making these assessments in an ongoing way is maintained and the public are protected?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I see the probation service continuing to have an important role to play. I see it becoming a more specialised organisation, a higher quality of professional expertise, focused on risk, focused on the more serious offenders. And I'm well aware that the point you make about people being fluid, offenders being fluid, is what we have to be very careful of. And I suppose some principles for you. The public sector cannot absolve itself of responsibility for risk. And so I see the probation service continuing to have responsibility ultimately for risk, and particularly for referrals to court where there is a serious issue during a period on licence, period on probation. The shape of how that is done may look different, but the principle needs to remain absolute. That, I'm not simply going to say, with the best will in the world, to one of the voluntary sector organisations in this room, here is a serious rapist, you are responsible for everything about them. The public sector has to retain a supervisory role and a risk management role where there is a danger of public harm. That won't change. So yes, the probation world will look different. I expect there to be opportunities in all of this for people in the probation world. But I'm absolutely clear that the public sector cannot absolve itself of the risk and the management of risk where we're talking about danger of harm to the community.
My name is Charlotte Marco. I'm Director of Safety Grounds, and like many of my colleagues in the room, we work with prisoners and their families. And we consider ourselves part of the Rehabilitation Revolution. We work closely with your department and many others. And my question really is about, as much as we embrace policy implements in our practice, we're also really aware and work really hard with yourselves to continue to allow practice and input from the front line to influence policy. So how does the continual emergence of payment by results and us getting ready to fit with that agenda allow the added value that we've historically brought to your own thinking around picking up the issues that policies are designed for? We do something else and we add to what we do. How do we continue to do that when what we're increasingly having to do is prepare for our engagement in a completely different model?
So what I'm trying to do, as I did with the work programme, is effectively get diktat away from what actually happens on the ground. Now it is different to the work programme in the sense that what I've just said in terms of the supervision management of harm and the most serious offenders doesn't disappear. So in the work programme you have a complete black box. The premise of the work programme provides is you do what works and we'll pay you when you're successful, and there really is no requirement upon you to do any particular individual thing. It's up to us for them to adapt. And there's some wonderfully done diverse examples of different ways of helping people get into the workplace. This is different to the degree that we've got that core responsibility around public harm as we have one. But it is still my intention to bring the black box principle to this as far as it's possible to do so. So that what we're doing is engendering a spirit of innovation. What I don't want is people in our departments sitting down and saying, here's the spec, this is what we've got to do. What I want is to capture innovation on the ground so that people are testing new ideas and individualising them, because no offender is exactly the same as the rest of the next chain. They all have different needs and challenges. And so the professionals working on the ground need to have the flexibility to adapt accordingly.
Mike Trace from Rehabilitation and Addicted Prisoners Trust. I think this is accepted wisdom, but it bears restating, is that if we want to change the numbers on reducing reoffending, then drugs and alcohol substance use is a key factor of that. With over 50% of the prisoners having a drug or alcohol problem that's driving the offending, and that's key numbers. Particularly welcoming your mention about cross-the-gate mentoring, because that's a very powerful tool in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. The role model. So the idea that most people in prison don't believe they can change. The most powerful response to that is, here's somebody in your shoes 5 years ago, 2 years ago, who's making those changes. And I'd echo what Rob said, which I go, is there is already an army of people out there in prison and ex-prisoners who are available for this function. A couple of structural points about it that I'd draw to your attention. The funding for drug and alcohol services went across to health this year. And despite some concerns we've had, it seems to be going reasonably well with the development of offender health. But it needs watching closely from the ministerial team. So I'd urge you to stay in close contact with your health counterparts on that.
I will do, and we are.
But there's a lot of that can be done within NOMS to create the circumstances where the mentoring and the recovery processes work a lot better. I've written a letter to you with some ideas, I'm sure there are other groups with others, but there's a lot NOMS can do without spending a penny on this. To be more efficient. So
I'm sure that's right. Well, I'll look at that carefully. One of the things that struck me, I was talking to a group of prison officers recently, involved in the rehab area of one of our prisons, who said one of their frustrations is that they have people coming in for short sentences. The rehab programs they need last longer than the sentence. So in the end, they're forced to just stabilise rather than treat. Now, one of the things I intend to do is to make a condition of release, the participation that we're talking about today. We can't have people walk out of prison saying, I don't fancy that. If we're going to release people from prison, then we should be able to make them subscribe to a program for a period of time. That should include continuing the drug rehab. I mean, it's a crazy situation when somebody can walk out of prison and say, well, I don't really want to carry on drug rehab. That's just not acceptable.
The spiralling costs of the Justice Department over the last 15 years have been driven by the doubling of the prison population and the proliferation of short-term prison sentences. Surely it's sensible to address the use of these short-term prison sentences, particularly for non-violent crimes, and look at the size of the prison population in general.
Look, I think the answer about the number of people in prison, if we find ourselves in a position where all this is delivered and change our hope, then prison numbers may fall naturally because fewer people are coming back and reoffending. What I don't want to be in a position is where a court looks at the offender and says, this is somebody I believe should be given a prison sentence, but does not feel able to do so because there aren't prison places. So, in an ideal world, nobody would offend and nobody would be in prison, but we're not in that world. And I do think there is a balance to have between justice, and most people who go to prison have committed many offences already. If you look at the typical number of people in a short sentence, they've actually committed plenty of offences and probably been punished in the community already once. It's about a balance. My goal, the rehabilitation revolution, is that we have more of the right people going to prison in the first place, but fewer of them coming back. And if we have a system that actually engages them while they're there, works with them after they've left, gets their lives back into the straight and narrow, then actually bringing them into the custodial world may be a bonus for them rather than else.
Javid Khan, Victim Support. I'd strongly like to welcome your focus on the victims first. One of your 5 priorities, and I think it really permeates the other 4 too. You also spoke very clearly about children and young people and their autonomy and how we tackle that. There's lots of research that talks about the victim and offender profile, and often adult offenders have been victims in their childhood. The challenge I pose is that we need to do a lot more to support children at their first point of victimization and stop it then as an early upstream intervention. Is that part of the vision?
I think it is. I mean, if you look across the mix of what we're trying to do in government, it is, if you look at the DWP, the real focus on trying to break down generational worklessness in households, a big influence for whether young people actually are engaged and go to school and look at parents going out to work in the morning and aspire to do the same things themselves. If you look at the work we're doing with troubled families to try and intervene where families are multiple issues, multiple challenges, coming into contact with a whole range of different agencies. What Michael Gove is doing in schools to try and deal with basic literacy issues, and indeed what Theresa May and I are doing around restorative justice, so that the first-time young offender does face a consequence for what they do. Maybe the 21st century version that's going to take the young person down by the ear down the road to apologise, but actually, I think everyone who commits an offence, if we possibly can, should face some form of consequence, even if it's a light touch solution through a restorative justice system. Early intervention is really important in all of this, in the home, in the school, in the criminal justice system. But our bit is to try and turn around the lives who we didn't get to in time. And that's the real drive, you know, I say that, we're talking about short-term sentences. You know, if we can get people into the system, if we can work with them, if we can properly mentor them, if we can show them a better way, if we can help them build skills, if we can get them into a rehab program and get some off drugs, take a bit of control of their lives for a period of time, and these are people who say, actually, I want to help, then we can make a real difference.
Mark Larson from the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. You referred to police and crime commissioners. How would you see them contributing to the delivery of this situation?
I think police and crime commissioners can be a really big help. The first thing is that in terms of work with victims, our plan is to devolve funding for victim services to the police and crime commissioners, so that there is a more localised focus to the work we do. But alongside that, I think that there's a big job to be done in just gluing together services, and particularly gluing together what local authorities do, what we do, and what other agencies do. I hope very much that in the whole policing and crime area, the police and crime commissions will sit in the middle as kind of a facilitator of improvements, whether it's getting more integrated offender management, whether it's making sure that different parts of different local authorities in the county area are working closely together. A really big part of the challenge is to make sure that all the work we do is done in a joined-up way, and I think they can play a really big part of it. Right, just a couple more questions and then we'll wind up.
Minister Ben Priestley from Unison. I've got two quick questions. The first is, will the rehabilitation revolution be driven by top-down central contracts with norms or the MJ being the commission, or is there a role for local commissioning run by probation trusts, local authorities, or local agencies, and will funding go that way? I'll leave it there, actually.
Okay. Well, a simple answer to that is, based on the experience so far, it will have to be contracted centrally, because trying to build payment by results contracts on a sort of multiple basis around lots of areas, I don't believe the commissioning expertise exists. It's enormously complicated to do it. It can take much, much longer to do it. All the experience of the work programme, I had lots of local authorities come to me and say, can we commission our best of the work programme? To which the answer was, it would be impossible to do that. But what we did do then, what we will do with this, is that we'll build a contracting structure that enables local authorities, local commissioners, to buy additional services tailored to the needs of their local communities from those providers, without having to go through the whole thing all over again. So the freedom you get for a particular problem with a particular group of offenders or a particular social issue in your area, as a local authority, you can add an extra dimension to the work that's being done, using local discretion, using a flexible contracting system that allows you to do that. Last question here.
Roger Bill, Selector Justice Services. Secretary of State, you talked very encouragingly about holistic reasons why people offend and holistic responses. Do you have any thinking about locality-based commissioning for services for all offenders from that locality, whether they are returning from the prison or receiving a community sentence? Because that would here fundamentally change the way in which the MOJ has to date commissioned services, i.e. down to
I'm expecting to integrate the delivery of community penalties and the supervision of offenders, both pre-prison and post-prison, in a way that creates a joined-up system. I don't see any logic in having separate tracks. It is better to have an integrated structure with a common team of people dealing with different challenges. Right, I think that's about all. Thank you very much.